that are cheaper to solve and all the rest of it. Although that's not to say we don't need to do this. Carbon looks like it's going to... I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens out of Copenhagen. My sort of... I mean, first of all, it's not about the science, obviously, what's going on over there. It's about politics. And... I mean, I'd like something to come out of it. I'm a little bit cynical, anything will. And even if something does come out of it, will people stick to it? I don't know. I think we're going to see much, much more regulation, and not just at a sort of country, industry level. I think just at a household level, huge amount of regulation and to some extent taxation, which some of it good, some of it bad. What else do we talk about? I mean, my reading of just generally energy, and this has been confirmed with talks to various people. I mean, if you think that in 10 or 20 years' time, we're all going to be driving around in electric cars, which are fueled by, you know, clean technology, dream on. It is not going to happen. In 30 years' time, it's still oil, gas, and coal, and a bit of nuclear. And there are various, I mean, you could disagree with all of these figures. The renewable side of it is going to be relatively small for quite a long time, but I think if you take a long enough perspective, it gets really, really interesting. And again, the tokenism around this worries me a bit. I mean, in London, I'm always nearly getting run over by these electric cars that never make any noise. And I think something like 45%, you know, fine, but they're not actually that green. You know, they're powered by electricity, 45% of which comes from, I think, coal, gas-fired. You know, the renewable bit or the nuclear bit is insignificant. I think it's under 13%. And you'd be much better off driving a hybrid, quite frankly. You know, and there's things like this, there's all this sort of focus on the plastic bag and how you mustn't have one. Yet there's no debate about what's in the plastic bag, which is generally a bunch of plastic packaging. Or everyone has a go at airline travel or 4x4s. Nobody's talking about air conditioning or concrete or, you know, what have you. I mean, there was Grand Designs I watched, which is, being in Australia, was probably like 20,000 years old, the episode, but it's probably 4. But, and there was somebody who had built an underground house in Cumbria, and it was all eco, and it was all wonderful apart from the fact it had several thousand tons of concrete in it, which you think, well, you know, so again, I think you've got to avoid making sort of really smart-ass statements about this, because, you know, it's very difficult to say whether one technology or one sort of product or lifestyle is better than the other. It's incredibly difficult to actually sort of pull that sort of stuff out. I think there is a danger, if companies do greenwash things, that we are going to build up quite a sort of high level of eco-cynicism, and we're already seeing that. If you look at the stats on people that think climate change is #1 issue, it's slowly declining. You know, the trust around people sorting it out is slowly declining, and part of that, I think, is to do with the sheer complexity of the debate, but it's also companies just doing ridiculous things and claiming they're green when they're just I mean, I know of a computer company that talks about their green plays with such open cynicism. It's absolutely frightening. So I think, you know, we're going to have to really be careful about that. And it's also sort of becoming a bit sort of too fashionable for its own good. And if obviously something becomes fashionable, it falls out of fashion. I mean, there's this phrase I quite like, which was, what was it? Conspicuous non-consumption. So it's a bit like, you know, it's the opposite of bling. Rather than showing the world how wonderful you are and your fancy jewelry and all the rest of it, you're doing the complete opposite, which is showing how sustainable you are. And it's got nothing to do with necessarily what your true beliefs are, I think, half the time. It's just you're trying to show off in a slightly different way. Okay, now I just want to go on to one other sort of set of scenarios, which I think is a useful way of framing the debate about, or the debate about sort of climate change and the environment. So this is on this axis we've basically got pessimism versus optimism again. But what I'm talking about is A, the economy, and B, the environment, climate change, if you want. On this one, we've got the level of social engagement. So this is sort of we up here and me down here. And I think this is possibly a interesting way of trying to understand where we've been, where we are now, and where we might be going. You know, we've been here. We were here for 20 years. Mooreism was all about growth. You know, just more, acquisition, consumerism, dear old Paris Hilton, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, clearly we had the global financial crisis, and we've also had the swine flu thing, and we've gone straight into personal fortress temporarily, which is very sort of Mad Max, the end of the world, oh my God, we're all going to, you know, at its extreme, if you go out to the edges of these scenarios, you get more extreme. So at the extreme, we are seriously doomed. This is sort of James Lovelock, I think, saying that the human species is actually threatened. And I don't know whether he actually said it, but at one point he was talking about, you know, breeding pairs left in the Arctic or something, which is, you know, a relatively extreme point of view. Although I do actually agree with him on the fact that, you know, it might be too late, and to some extent all we're talking about is adaptation rather than actually solving it or anything like that. I think we've come out of this now, and we're up here. There's a great, great book called Enough by John Nash, and there's another great one called How to Be Free by Tom Hodgkinson, which is a very sort of enoughiст, and is obviously completely the opposite of moreism. And this is a sort of values set, or a way of looking at something like climate change. So enoughism is about, it's very anti-consumerist. It's about deciding that, you know, I just don't like the way things work. I've got too much stuff. I've had enough of the way things work. It's very sort of earth hour. It's switching things off. It's using less. It's deciding what you can do without. It's very much sort of rebalancing work and life, living more sustainably. You know, you're not stop buying things. You're just buying good stuff and you're looking after it. So consumption is a bit more considered. If something goes wrong, you don't just chuck it and buy another one from China. You actually try and fix it. You know, there's a lot of bartering and, at the extreme, bartering and swapping going on. And actually, it's pretty nice. I mean, this is also, if you go really extreme here, it gets nasty. It's very sort of jingoistic, xenophobic. Here, it's actually quite nice. It's quite community. It localizes, and everyone looks after each other. I think that happens here as well to some extent. You know, family is rediscovered, community is rediscovered. We're all sort of looking out for each other. Now, I actually think where we really are now is we're sitting on the fence wondering where to go. Corporates love this world, so they're all trying to pull us in this direction. And Smart Planet, which is practically IBM's tagline now, I think, is the idea that science and technology will save us. So this is sort of Google and Siemens and GE and Apple and all of that kind of stuff. And it's really just a continuation of the fact that science really has always, up to, I know it's created problems, but it's actually been pretty good to us overall. So maybe we'll sort of do that, and then obviously there's the big question of do we go down there again? I don't know. I mean, I hope not, but I have a horrible feeling that we might. Because we kind of got no memory. I mean, once we've sort of sorted out the recession and if money becomes relatively cheap again, I think we're just, you know, greed's not gone. It's having a bit of a nap at the moment, but we could very easily go back there. And then you get another bubble, possibly real estate again, possibly clean technology. The whole thing starts all over again. What does the world look like in each of these worlds? Well, let's look at the sort of the moreism one. Well, your climate change deniers would be very much sort of in this world. Either you just don't believe it at all, it's Y2K. I don't believe a single word of this, I'm going to completely ignore it. Or you might be really nasty and say, oh, it's probably all true, but I couldn't give a damn. Not my problem. You know, I haven't got any kids, I'll be dead in 20 years. Not really something I need to worry about, so I'll just carry on consuming, thank you very much. This is a sort of this is the personal fortress one. So this is sort of the end of the world thing. And I guess this is sort of, you know, buying a lot of sandbags, quite frankly, in the case of Nottingham, possibly. I mean, you've kind of given up on society and government and business and science, and you're just sort of doing the best you can. I mean, there's an awful lot. Funny enough, there's an awful lot of media around this. I mean, sort of apocalyptic media. I mean, 212 being the latest example. Probably Cormac McCarthy's The Road would be this. There's a lot of great sort of doomsday stuff by the BBC. And this is really just trying to sort of prevent it from happening until the last possible minute, really. I think this is the least likely outcome, to be honest. I think this is extremely unlikely. Enoughism, I think, is a really interesting potential world. And I think a lot of people would quite like to live here, actually. It's actually quite pleasant. The pressure's off in terms of having to compete with everybody the whole time. It's a bit more balanced between work and home, spending more time with your family. And it is actually strangely satisfying to get rid of some of this technology. I mean, we have a dishwasher at home which I can't stand using, so I tend to wash by hand. It's somehow so fantastically liberating. It's just, and it's when things break, and I'm pretty useless, but when they break and I do manage to fix them, it's just totally fantastic. I love gardening, you know, so all of this sort of stuff, I think, you know, I think people will be really, really happy here. Quite challenging for corporations because you're fundamentally saying, I don't want all your stuff, or I want much, much less of it. I'm going to make sure I really, really look after it. So that's a real challenge to most organisations. I mean, organisations in this world, I mean, Waitrose, funnily enough, John Lewis Partnership fits quite well in here. The whole cooperative idea works really well in this world. So you might see a sort of change in business models, or you get, I mean, Kiva is very much like this, which is that online microfinance site.